Hey, welcome to Horns Up. This is episode number 20. And like we did episode 10, we are back in Starbucks to do this.
Yeah.
I mean, this is becoming an anniversary kind of a thing, right? Every 10th episode, we need to be back here.
When we have horns up and cappuccinos or Americano in my case up.
All right. We've got something special lined up today.
Yeah,
just to celebrate episode 20. I don't know how the stars aligned, but it was as simple as just dropping an email and we got a positive reply.
Yeah.
Now, this is somebody who's been one of my personal heroes or one of my personal favorites without even me knowing about it, and we'll get to that later. But everybody who's like claims to be a fan of metal has heard his music because he's played with death, because he's the guy who formed Cynic, and because, well, now he is doing so many other things apart from Cynic that the guy literally needs no introduction.
Yeah, and
Right?
I'm another band to add to that for even people who don't listen to metal, a band like Aeon Spoke.
Exactly. So, who are we talking about?
Paul Masvidal.
Paul Masvidal.
And I must give credit to our guest earlier, Hans Grossman, for this. And his tip on just dropping an email,
It just worked wonders.
Yeah. And after that, that's kind of been an approach that I take. It's like,
Exactly.
hey,
yeah.
Animesh, who do you want to talk to? Hey, let's
Yeah.
send him an email.
Boom. Either they reply, either
Yeah.
they don't. At least we tried.
Yeah.
And it was so cool of Paul to immediately just reach, just let us know that he was on for it. And then obviously scheduling got a little bit weird. But
Yeah.
get this, he gave us a time of day which was free for him. And that was right after a yoga class.
Yeah. So this guy walks
So very
the talk.
Paul Masvidal.
Yeah, and this guy walks the talk. Huh?
Anyway, let's not cheapen this anymore. Masvidal had a new release out earlier the month or earlier in the year, which is the first of a trio of releases, right?
Yeah.
This one's called Mythical. The other two will be called Human Vessel. So all in all, you have Mythical Human Vessel. For fans of Cynic or who've heard Eon Spoke, you'll probably know that it's Paul's music because it sounds so much like Paul.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. This is not a stereotypical metal record, is it?
I would put it this way. If you're expecting Focus, they're far ahead of that.
Yeah, definitely. It isn't Cynic.
Yeah.
But it's still so much Paul Masvidal.
And there's so much going on. I mean, this is one of those releases where I actually had to kind of shut out of everything, put my focus into. Sorry for that term, but that's the best term that came to my head. And the more I feel it's like, for me, it was like reading a book. The more you kind of effort or thing you put into it, that much you kind of get out. And Paul, of course, in our chat talks more about the album and why it is the way it is. But yeah, I think if you take away all those preconceptions of it, I mean, think of it like I would say even if you take the name aside from it, standalone, that music stands on its own. It's great.
Definitely it does. For me, it's become one of my most played records in the year so far. I mean, I'm easily slotting it in my top 10 already.
Wow.
Right? And that's because I'm using it a lot. There's all of us end up reaching back to albums so that they can affect us in some manner. Sometimes you need a pick me up. Sometimes you need just a companion. Sometimes you need just something to help you feel, just help you restore confidence in you or whatever. Mythical is shaping up to be an album that I keep revisiting just to calm me down. And it's fantastic how much of an effect that has. And why it has that effect is something we'll explore, because that, to me, is the art of songwriting and the art of scientific as well as artful songwriting, where the artist literally knows what kind of effect he's going for and he's making sure he delivers on it.
I mean, we talked about in our previous episode about data bots. I mean, can you imagine
Exactly, yeah.
you channeling this kind of music using artificial intelligence? Why brutal death metal? So if you Dadabot guys are listening to us, Which
That'll
would,
be a crazy experiment.
yeah.
Yeah, I
mean,
would. Yeah.
give us some credit when you try something like this out, huh?
Yeah, sure. Anyways, let's not keep people waiting any longer. Here's Paul Masvidal. Yes, the Paul Masvidal.
I'd like to welcome to Horns Up, Paul Masvidal. I don't think the man needs any more introduction than we've already given him. Paul, thank you for your time so much. It's a huge honor.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy to speak with you guys. So thanks for reaching out.
All right, I'm going to dive right into Mythical Human Vessel. Am I allowed to call it MHV for short?
Sure.
All right. So just to start off, it's a trilogy, and you've shared the first of the releases with us, Mythical. So right off the bat, why a trilogy?
Well, I had, I had a collection of songs, a lot more than 15 actually. And when I started to kind of review them, I narrowed it down. I started to see a story taking shape, and
Right.
It just made sense without being too literal about that story. I saw a beginning, middle, and end, and I saw three parts, and I thought it would make more sense to break it up into three parts, just to kind of digest the pieces and kind of what's happening lyrically, and musically actually as well. So there was just kind of a narrative that was happening, and it just kind of logically led to being three pieces, broken up into three pieces. I didn't really intend, had no real idea that it would end up that way. It was just kind of part of the process.
Okay.
Right.
So, as an aside, in stereotypical trilogy fashion, can we expect, say, an opposite point of view on human and then a resolution of sorts in Vessel when we eventually do get to hear them?
Well, it's I wouldn't say opposite in terms of like a metal album on the second one and some merging of the two on the third. They were all kind of the same language in terms of being acoustically driven songs, and having kind of the same character, the same kind of territory. The evolution is more subtle, and it has to do with the kind of the space that's happening. It's more of like a subtle level thing that's happening within the story, and then also the production kind of shifts. It gets a little bit more expansive, and the last Vessel has the most kind of band type songs too. It has, I think, is it 3 of the 5? I think have full, drums and bass on them. So, but yeah, it's not a literal kind of thing where you're doing a traditional trilogy in that sense. It's definitely more subtle, and it's for the listener to discover what the difference is. So I don't like explaining too much because I love the subjective aspect of music, and for the listener to get their own interpretation going on without explaining too much what's happening for me on a personal level.
All right. So have you recorded all 3 and are just waiting for releases, or you?
Yeah,
Right.
they're all
Okay.
finished.
Okay.
Yep. I'm still not even sure when the second and third will be released, but I'm having a phone call tomorrow with somebody actually that's going to help me kind of direct that. But I have a feeling somewhere around the fall for Human, and then Vessel will be probably early winter or something, maybe December or late November. We'll see, something like that.
All right. Okay. Something to look forward to this year. Just moving back to Mythical for a bit. Now, I read that you recorded the early demos of these songs over a decade ago. How have they evolved over the years? And what kind of made you realize that this was the right time for these songs to be shared with the world?
Well, I'd say like a handful of them go back that far. They all kind of span different eras, and the thing with these, it's one of these things where, as an active songwriter who's constantly creating music, every record I essentially release, and that falls with Cynic as well, is a curated collection of material that's kind of existed at some point in time. Either some of it's more recent, some of it's going back, and it's kind of hand-picking a collection of material that makes sense. And I feel like with these songs, they just, they told me they were ready. I kind of had them there. I knew the demos themselves were pretty raw. I had the embryonic kind of forms, but I wouldn't say they were fleshed out. I mean, some more than others. But they were, it was one of those things where I just knew it was time. It's interesting how songs, kind of tell you if you stay out of their way, the creative process, it kind of lets you know. And it has to do with kind of, for me, with this material, it had to do with reaching a point of being willing to be that exposed and vulnerable and raw and real. So it was a journey inward, and then the song said, "Here we are, and let's get this, let's do this," and so I did it. And for me, they're not really finished until they're shared, and heard by people. So it's this is really truly the completion of the material as it gets released.
All right. So over the 10 years, how many times did you revisit these songs, reshape them, remold them, eventually be happy with them?
Well, different things for different songs, but I would say that most of them had the whatever embryonic kind of raw demo existed, they were just put away and not really touched until the past year when I finished these albums. So it was kind of like just stuff that I had, like, I mean, there is some things that are much newer, and then I kind of revisited them and said I need to finish and see what this thing is, or it was telling me it's time to finish us. So I didn't really come back to it. I had in the back of my mind at some point this thought that I would come to this kind of type of record. I didn't know what songs would reveal themselves because I have so much archival material at various stages of my creative process. So, but these particular ones stood out based on what was happening conceptually and what it how it felt in my body, and I just basically spent the past year just immersed in it, refining and readdressing and figuring out what these songs were and how to complete them. So I'd say really the past year was really where the real work happened with the material.
All right. Now, the first thing I noticed about Mythical is how stripped down it is. It's raw. It's almost like you're bearing your soul to the world. The lyrics, they dwell on loss, depression, heartache, pain in some way or the other. They also seem very personal. But there's a quote somewhere where you say that though they are deep and personal, these songs and these lyrics really aren't about you. Could you help us understand that?
Well, it's one of those things where I always feel like, although we're always writing about our own subjective experience when it comes to songwriting, there is a deeply personal kind of revelation happening. There's also this sense that it really has nothing to do with me, because I at least as a writer, as a creative person, I rarely feel like I'm in charge of what's happening. I feel like I'm more being charged. I'm being driven by something, and that's kind of the nature of the muse and the creative process. It's really beyond me. It's beyond the self, and it's when I can kind of get out of my way that I find that it gets better, like versus thinking I have anything to do with this. And so it's really kind of about creating space within myself to allow this material to come through. And I don't mean that in like I'm a channeler or some kind of, preciousness with it, but it does feel like I don't really own it. It's not mine. It doesn't belong to me. So that's really what I mean when I say, they're deeply personal and yet not at all. It's this whole thing of being a musician is so mysterious to me, the idea of shaping sound, sound molecules and creating, those environments. And as someone who's been very interested in Nada yoga and everything, I'm just kind of obsessed with sound in general. So it's you realize that this exists without you. It has, you're just more of a vehicle for it to reveal itself.
Could you help us understand what was driving you during this mythical human vessel process? You mentioned that there's something driving you. What was that?
Yeah, I can't even put my finger on it. It does certainly have a charge. It's not unlike how I feel after a long meditation retreat. Like I don't sleep a lot. I'm completely obsessed uh, you know, I'm in a very concentrated state, I guess you could say. And I'm completely like ruled by just trying to listen to what it's telling me. And so it's really hard to articulate with words, what kind of happens during a heightened creative process. But it does feel like you're just trying to listen to what's and be of service to a process. And it's a wonderful place. I will say that, like, it's the most meaningful moments of my life essentially are when I'm in this process. I feel like I have a purpose. I feel like my life, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be in service of some kind of creative process. But to get too literal, you really can't. It's so mysterious and without words. It really goes beyond words.
All right. Something else we found you've said about your music is that it's universal because it's personal. What do you really mean by that?
Well, I guess what I mean is that truth is we all share truth, the same truth essentially, and I mean, I say that on a going beyond, ego and self and mind, that we all kind of have at the root of our experience as human beings. There's a unified kind of aspect. There's a non-dual connective kind of tissue, and that is universal. And even the themes that kind of were conveyed in these songs, the touching into sadness and trying to get very, very real with the nature of, the mind and thoughts and all that stuff. I mean, I think we all share that as human beings. It's if anyone's paying attention here, it's quite a fragile experience to be alive and to be on this planet. And the fact that we all, get to die at the end, and leave this body, it's intense. And so I think we all kind of have something really, there's points that are shared across the board, regardless of where we come from on the planet, the color of our skin, the languages we speak, all these families that we come from, all of that stuff is really kind of irrelevant in the end. And so I that's kind of what I mean when I think of truth being universal. It's just the human experience of being alive. Not to get into religious concepts, but the Buddha spoke about all this stuff, kind of these universal things that we all share that are timeless, regardless of what era you're in. These are always important conversations, and that's the kind of stuff that's always interested me, going beyond the day-to-day, and the mundane. I'm always interested in the deeper questions and trying to understand the nature of reality.
All right. The other huge takeaway as such from Mythical is the soundscape. At first, I didn't really know what was happening. I didn't know the science behind the binaurals or the isochronic tones. Eventually, when all of it comes together on track 6 from the album that's called Mythical itself, that really, what I found was it really helped calm myself down, so much so that I've begun using this record like a medicine or a drug of sorts. Was that the intention behind releasing this?
Yeah, well, there's the whole thing with using isochronic tones is that it's kind of it's using your intent. So there's this whole effect that has to do with activating your own will, and what happens is that you're basically setting an intention, and that could be something as simple as I want energy, or I want to feel more relaxed, or I want to feel more, more uplifted and joyful. Whatever it is, you set that, you plant that seed, and then the tones, because they're full spectrum, they cover the entire audio spectrum. So they're vibrating at each of the frequencies of the mind states, data, delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma. So depending on what seed you plant, the intention, that kind of thought that you kind of lay the groundwork for, it basically, your mind, will go and find a resonant frequency that activates that intention. And it's a really interesting experiment in self-hypnosis and how to kind of work with our minds. I've learned through meditation practice how to kind of, not to be an observer of my thoughts, to see things as they are, to go beyond kind of the self as an identity. And I think what's interesting with these tones is that they are kind of a modern medicine, and it's an empowering medicine, rather than the doctor saying, here, take this pill or do this thing. It's more just like you are partaking in this process. You're an active participant in your own healing. And all the ancient medicines, including Ayurveda, of course, and and Chinese medicine like acupuncture. I mean, they use this rule, of you're working with your own body's intelligence to produce healing. So the isochronic tones are another version of that, essentially, to kind of activate and work with your own intelligence to heal yourself. So I personally, I'm so glad to hear that you're finding some benefit in them, because they've completely changed my life. I mean, I've been deep into this stuff for years now, and I knew, I was like, I've got to find a way to get this into the work, because it really works, So I'm encouraged to hear that you're finding some benefit.
How did you first discover the isochronic tones? And the way you're describing it, for a lack of better reference, have you taken on a role as a doctor to the world through this record?
No, I mean, by no means am I claiming anything like that. I'm just a musician, in service of this work. But what's interesting is that I discovered, I was into binaural beats before isochronic tones. That's where you have the frequency in each ear, and your brain makes up for the missing frequency. So, and then I did more research and I discovered isochronic tones. And then I started to kind of delve deeper into the mynoise.net site, which is Stephane Pigeon's site, who actually is a doctor. And he's like an audio genius, kind of one of these incredible minds that understands sound on a level I've never met someone who's works so deeply with sound. And he has on his website this ability to create your own tones. So I started to experiment with making my own tones, and I like the idea of isochronic tones, because for me, the fact that you didn't have to wear headphones, although it's recommended, I thought that was interesting, that it could work without the headphones. And then, so I started to experiment with his custom player. And then I discovered I had some limitations. It wasn't accurate. It wasn't holding the tempos accurately. It wasn't holding to the certain keys that I was programming. So I emailed him just innocently and said, hi, Dr. Pigeon, I'm a huge fan of your website. I love your work. I'm trying to do these tones. Can you help me out, or what do you have any recommendations? And he said, well, send me some of your music. Let me hear what you're trying to do. And I send him some demos of some of the songs, and he immediately responded and says, I really love what you're doing. I think these songs are fantastic. How about I program the tones for your records, and you do you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. So I created a player for him, essentially, and called the Transdimensional Traveler. So we did a trade, and I felt so blessed, actually, that he was willing to do this for me, because the guy, he's really at the highest level to me in terms of audio people. I mean, he's, people like Brian Eno look up to him. Like
Hmm.
he's like it's insane, the level of where he rolls, and so I was so grateful and happily said I would love to, help you and do a player. I'd be honored to make a player for you because I'm fascinated with your players. And so we did that, and then he would ask me, with each song, tell me about the lyrical content, tell me, the key signature, the general movement, the tempo, and he would customize these tones based on. So there's, and they're all kind of similar in an odd way, but they're quite different actually as well. um, and so each of the records, there's the tones inside the songs, and then the sixth track of each record is the first. It's the songs all over again, but without the music. It's just the tones connected together. So it's a kind of a way of re-experiencing the songs, but without the music, just as a tone bath. So it's yeah, it was. But again, it was just one of those things where it I loved what was happening because the suddenly it became even less about me. Now this is a real act of service. This music is has an opportunity to offer genuine healing, a therapeutic aspect. And as somebody who's done work in working with the terminally ill and in music therapy, I was so happy to find that I could kind of merge these worlds with these songs and find some kind of something that became an offering beyond just these collections of songs. It had something that went much deeper.
Was there any time during this entire process of a year or so that you told us about, did you have any worry in your mind that, this could be looked as pseudoscience or even worse, a gimmick?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're always going to get naysayers arguing against any new technologies. I mean, you had people, saying Einstein was doing pseudoscience. You had people, I mean, if you look historically at the people attacking the pseudoscience community, and, obviously there are versions of pseudoscience that do exist, but there's always going to be people resistant to new forms of new modalities and new technologies and new ways of thinking and new ways of working with oneself. And that's just part of the process, and I'm well schooled in people saying what you're doing isn't working. I mean, that goes back to Cynic's first album. Everyone around us was saying this stuff is horrible and no one's going to like it and you don't know what you're doing. And and we went against all odds, and fought tooth and nail to stick to our decisions. I was so stubborn about the music. I said, I don't care what you think. I'm gonna do this. And it's so I feel like you really have to get to a point where you stop caring about what people think. I think as a musician, especially if you go around, governed by thinking about trying to make other people happy or please other people, you'll never get anything done. You really have to just push forward and trust your instincts and go into the unknown. And sometimes you might fall on your face, and that's okay too. But um, again, this is tapping into the power of the mind, and we're basically, apes still when it comes to how much we utilize our own minds. And so people who go and criticize that to me are just people who are afraid, or fearful and haven't actually done the work themselves. So it's really, again, it's one of those things where everyone inevitably you're going to cover the spectrum with how it's perceived. But that's the beauty of art. You take risks. You
Yeah.
go and you know what I mean. You get out of your comfort zone. That's our job.
All right. In this day and age where music is so heavily commodified, and of course you have all the chatter about short attention spans, etc., are you expecting too much from the listener through these records? Because these things, a listener can't dive into it extremely quickly. You need to listen to it and not just hear it.
Yeah. It takes some time. It takes well, I think that's the nature of the work I've always done. It's not necessarily curated for the public in mass. It's more for the more refined listener, who has who's willing to get into the details and spend more time in the work. And those are the types of artists that always spoke to me. You know, I've never been much of a pop culture person, so it's I think the fact that you have to earn it and that you have to spend time with it, actually, that's awesome. I want people to have to spend more time with it and to kind of have to slow down and to, you know, because like you're saying, especially this day and age, everyone's so distracted that to kind of go in the opposite direction in many ways for me feels like a good move, you know.
Right. We've spent a lot of time talking about Mythical. We'd like to give our listeners a taste from it. Which track would you recommend we play and why?
Wow, I mean, it's so hard for me to be objective with the work. I don't even know. I mean, I just whichever one you're feeling, I guess. Trying to think. I mean, obviously, probably a lot of listeners have heard Parasite, I'm guessing, because that was the first
single.
Yeah, so maybe Into the War, you know. That's kind of a more assembled piece. It's probably the biggest song on the record, and it definitely has kind of an arc to it, more so than the others. So that would be a good one to kind of introduce people that haven't heard the work. It'll definitely require you to slow down. It's not it's a slower number. So that would be an interesting way in.
All right. So here's Into the War from Mythical.
Teach me not to judge you. Please find the patience in me, the patience in you. Teach me not to hurt you. Forgive the anger in me, the anger in you. Into the war with no armor, and into the fields of no colors. No one hears me now, and I don't hear you now. I may say I love you, don't have. It took too many years for these words to arrive, and I may say I've lost you, don't sigh. It took too many fears for this heart to realize.
So, Paul, you've said that this project has a dual purpose to inspire pure enjoyment at one end and psychic healing at the same time. Can you please explain?
Well, that's pretty much says it. I like the idea of people getting benefit from music without trying to bring too much meaning to it. Just the sheer pleasure of the sound. I know I indulge in music that makes me feel good or has a beauty to it, or just out of for sheerly aesthetic purposes, or however it makes me feel in my body. And then there's that other component, which is the deeper sense of what it does. That I feel like this is the paradox, right? Is that I want to offer something meaningful and substantial, and so I like to go also beyond that sheer surface of something that just resonates with you, and go into something that kind of speaks on a deeper level and helps maybe wake us up a little, helps us look in the mirror and look at who we are. I mean, this is, if I can help in any way with someone kind of bringing more ease to someone's life, I feel like I've done my job.
So, Paul, you had a show on June 18th. Were there any challenges in translating these songs and all the isochronic tones, etc., to a live setting?
Well, I've spent a lot of time kind of flushing out how to do that, and it's an ongoing process. And every show, I've played one other show actually, but the idea here is that it's an evolving organism, and I think the end goal, or if there is one, is to bring this into a dome for an immersive kind of reality experience where it's an experiential thing. So these shows kind of leading up to the dome are kind of are just like essentially variations and attempts at kind of touching into it. And there's I feel like a regular venue like this one is more of a 2D setup, where you're more of a traditional stage, and then you get the experience, which involves some projections and some kind of floating holographic kind of experiences and visuals, and a very kind of ethereal, mysterious kind of energy. And then there's this moment where there's a bath that happens in the middle of the set, where people go inward and do a mini tone bath kind of practice. So this is all kind of these are all different types of shows. I'm kind of developing these records in a way that where they can translate into different types of venues. And again, the end goal is this dome kind of version, which will have a much more kind of technology-based experience and almost in the round performance that goes much deeper into a visual kind of component. But yeah, it's working. It's definitely working. I think it actually translates really effectively in a live setting, because it's a beautiful contrast of like really modern technology with this incredibly raw, intimate thing involving an acoustic guitar and a human voice. So you have this contrast, of something very earthy and grounded, combined with this very kind of modern, experimental, futuristic kind of technology. So it's a merging of the two worlds, and it seems to be working well.
Wow, that sounds like quite an experience.
Yeah, I can't wait for some chance somehow to experience this. Come to India soon, man.
I really hope I can bring it to India. That would be fantastic.
Yeah. So Mythical is out on your own record label, Masvidal Records. Do you plan on adding more artists to your roster, putting out any more releases other than your own music?
I haven't thought that far. It's a possibility, depending on how things unfold. I mean, I would certainly be interested in developing talent. I've worked with young artists and kind of worked with people as a producer in various capacities. So it does speak to me. It's just a question of how far in I'm willing to go with wearing that hat, because running a record company is a whole other gig, and definitely another type of full-time job. So it's a question of how I don't think I could do it half-heartedly. If I did it, I'd have to go all the way in, and it's possible. It is possible at some point that could evolve into something, because it does speak to me, the idea of signing and developing new talent. I love that idea.
Awesome.
Awesome. So, Paul, we've kept you for around half an hour already. So, let's start winding this down, talking a bit about your earlier work. I'm a huge fan of that 70s show.
Oh, yeah,
and I
same
know you were involved in it somehow. What was your involvement in it?
I worked for Ben Vaughn. He was the composer. And since the beginning, since he got that show, I started to work for him. I actually started out as his assistant before he had that 70s show. And then when he found out I could play guitar, he started to bring me in as a guitar player. And basically, I became the guitar player for the show, where I was, and anytime you essentially were hearing guitars, it was me playing, in that show as a session guitarist, working under Ben and a guy named Jeff Sudekin. So I was, the guitar dude playing guitar.
Damn.
All this time, I thought it was Cheap Trick doing side riffs.
Yeah, there was some moments where we brought in other bands and artists and did covers, obviously, and there was a lot of sound-alikes, because a lot of times with this world of television, sometimes you want to do something that sounds like Pink Floyd, but Pink Floyd aren't going to give you rights to their song, or it's going to be really expensive. So you have to kind of rip it off without risk getting sued, So I had to do a lot of these rip-off things, which is great practice as a musician, because you're trying to sound like, David Gilmour, or sound like, Stevie Ray Vaughan, or different like players from the 70s, going way back. It was there was just it was just an amazing era of music, obviously, but that show was incredible. I mean, it was so well written and so funny, and it did well because it was just very smart, and it was just really well executed. But so yeah, if you hear guitar, next time you hear the guitar, you can think of me.
I'm sure. Now, I have to ask this because it's been on my mind, and I'm sure Animesh is also for a while, and we've always wanted to know this. Why did you name your band Cynic?
Well, it's funny. It's kind of uneventful in a sense. As a child, when I was pretty young, I had different band names leading up to Cynic, but I remember my mother used to have this enormous dictionary, one of those like big ones that like just really big fat book, hardcover, and I used to just scroll through it, and I was fascinated with words, and I remember I just turned to a page and I saw cynic, and I thought, that is a cool word, and it just had this thing where there, it begins with a C, it ends with a C, it has the Y and the I, and then the N in the middle. So it has this interesting, I can't remember what they call that in language, but it has this interesting thing happening where it's almost the same thing backwards. You know what I mean? It reads forward and back.
Palindrome.
A palindrome, yeah.
A palindrome, yeah. So it had that thing, and I don't know, on some young, creative, experiential level, it resonated with me just purely as it appeared as letters. And then of course, back then, the definition read a combination of things. It said, it involved the ancient Greeks, and it said that the Greeks were these people that, believe that virtue constitutes happiness. And so it kind of got into this idea that, I don't know if you know much about the ancient Cynics, but they were essentially like homeless people in ancient Greece, intentionally homeless, kind of like, some of the yogis, that choose to be homeless. And their idea was, I'm ridding myself of all my possessions. My happiness has nothing to do with the external world. And, that is to me, they were the yogis of ancient Greece. They were taking that whole practice into Greece, and obviously India did it way before Greece, but it's kind of, it was that idea, and it was brought into these philosophies in the Greek world. And then it's interesting how the word over time changed. It became, because one of the main proponents of the Cynics was this guy named Diogenes, and the story goes that he walked around in broad daylight. He slept in like an abandoned bathtub in the Acropolis in Greece, in Athens, and the story goes that he would walk around with a lantern that was always lit in the middle of the day, and people would say, why do you have this lantern? And his answer was, I'm trying to find an honest man. And and yeah, and I thought that was so profound. I mean, there's just so many layers that are so fascinating, and that's but if you look at the meaning of the word over time, a cynic became someone who doubts the truth of somebody, who doubts people's. So it's interesting. You see how it's kind of evolved in modern times. But I just, again, purely aesthetic, the appearance of the word, and then eventually the meaning, and then the meaning took much more, meant something on a much more profound level for me, because I feel like I've always practiced that the external world is not going to dictate my happiness, that it's more of an inner to outer kind of thing here. So I've in some ways I became a true cynic, in a sense. So it's there was something there profound that I was connecting to as a child.
We're down to our last question, and this comes from a place where a lot of the artists that we've featured are kind of like metal artists, and
we are a metal podcast, and we first heard of you
through a
metal band, and of course all of that taking into consideration.
So we just want to know, at least, what does the word metal mean to you, and do you think you are metal?
Well, I mean, I certainly have a history of metal, and I consider myself a metalhead. Like I have, I'm, through and through. I mean, I played in Death. I mean, I was, I'm part of that scene in a very deep way. I think what's interesting is that as an outsider in the metal community, somebody who's always been, I never connected with I remember at one time, actually, I remember trying, it was really a result of peer pressure. I thought that I had to be tough. I thought I had to put on this sense of armor and toughness and tough guy. And I really bought that myth, that lie, in a sense, that that's what you had to be metal. And I realized it took a while for me to come around to realizing metal it's really about absolute freedom of expression and embodying everything, to being as completely honest and real with yourself. It's not like the whole metal of like armor and protection and masculinity is actually bullshit. That's not, that's kind of, that doesn't really, but that somehow became part of the culture, with certain bands. They kind of brought this tough guy thing. So I always had this weird, I had an interesting relationship with metal because I struggled with that component. I was an odd child. I was wearing yogi clothes and tie-dyes with Death. I mean, I was totally I really wasn't feeling very metal, and I tried, and then I felt more and more like, wow, this isn't, and then I came into it and I started to realize, wow, Chuck is actually a very interesting and eccentric and unique person who doesn't fit the archetype as well. He was like an older brother to me, and I thought, I'm going to follow his lead. He's out there during interviews saying he loves cats, and he has a tenderness about him, and I thought, that is powerful. Like, to be vulnerable is metal. To be real, to be like, this is the real strength. So, and I came around, and realized that it's much deeper than that, really. And this is the beauty of metal, is that freedom to kind of completely express yourself and have no boundaries. So, the thing is, in the pop culture reference, if you say, oh, I play metal, people just jump to like Pantera and like kind of, aggro muscle guys or something. You know what I mean? They really think you're this like meathead or something. And it's like, wait, we're not necessarily, we can be nerdy and sensitive too, and into metal, like we're everything. And so I feel like that's been our job, and some of us, especially with the progressive music community over the past decade, especially, it's changed, and the perception of it's changed, the community's evolved, and we've certainly come a long way, and I'm really grateful for that. So I mean, that's really what metal embodies to me, is no boundaries, authenticity, and being bold and brave and real, and there is a degree of rebellion in that as well, because you're going against the grain. You're standing up for yourself. You're being who you believe in. You're fighting against the norms of a conformed society. All this, everyone. You know what I mean? It's really standing in, following your own path, and that's what metal is to me.
Wow.
I think you've kind of summed up a lot of what we've been talking about on this podcast and previous episodes also. Thank you very much, Paul, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Wow. That was Paul Masvidal, Peter. He spoke to us.
I'm still pinching myself that we pulled off this interview.
Yeah.
And who knew that, 6-8 months ago when we were talking about doing a podcast together, that we'd actually speak to him, let alone pull off an interview like this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, completely. I'm still left speechless. I think it was a joy.
yeah,
Yes, I'm sounding super fanboy, but come on, man. It's very rare to actually find people who appreciate the art of conversation. It
And-
felt like catching up with a friend.
yeah, and that I think that was one of the best parts about the interview. It didn't feel like
An interview.
in an interview. It felt like he was sitting here with us, having a
Yeah.
conversation, chatting about his life. So, yeah, I'm really glad we did that. Ticking off a box for us of achievement, I don't know, but personally, I feel that.
Personally, I'm thrilled that we managed to do it.
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to what more he has up his sleeve with the rest of the
Ooh,
releases.
yes, that's something we forgot to touch upon. So here's a little bit of tidbit. We got this piece of news from Paul after we shut down recording, and that's the fact that Cynic will be releasing new music soon.
Yeah. That's quite exciting, to be honest.
Yeah,
'Cause-
absolutely. I honestly, the last thing that they released, that single Humanoid,
yeah.
I loved it.
For me, it seemed like a progression from Trace to Nail.
Yes, it harked back to Trace the Nair more than Kindly Bent to Free Us. It
Yeah.
sounded more sharp, concise, crisp,
Yeah.
and more true to the Cynic sound as such, right?
Yeah, so that's why I'm quite excited to see what Paul has in store for us, especially now coming from an album.
Especially after something which he's done as a solo artist. I
Yeah.
think it's time to get his energies back and concentrate a bit more on Cynic.
Yeah,
I would love to see that happen. Paul, whatever happens next, we're with you.
and we'll want to talk to
And
you
we'll
about
want
it.
to talk
for
to you
sure.
about it again. I hope you would want to talk to us too. All right. So that was
From-
episode.
from the two fanboys in India.
So that was episode 20. Wow, I still can't believe it happened. Let's see what different avenues or different topics we talk about next week. I really don't know what's going to happen. Let's see what.
No teaser this time.
No teaser this time. No inadvertent spoilage
Yeah,
either.
but yeah.
Anyways,
Until the next time, guys.
horns up.
Horns up.